can unmute yourself, and we can also mute you if necessary, if there's some background noise or interference. And if you have any questions today, let us know through the chat, and or you can raise your hand. And then when there's time, we'll call on you. And then also, please make sure that your full name is showing in the participants list so that we can call on you. And then also that helps us with attendance, which is how we capture who's at the meeting for the purposes of voting. And also just making sure your name is there helps us identify you. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is share the agenda, which I have on my screen over here. All right, can someone tell me if you can see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so that is, those are the things we're going to cover today. The first thing on the agenda is the election results. We had 4 constituency groups positions that were up for re-election this year, and those were the federal, that would be me, the land surveyor position, that's Gary, NGOs, that was Mike, or nonprofits, Mike Shanahan was up for re-election, the regional position, that's Dom Elefante. And so the results are that I am returning as a federal rep. And let's see, Gary Eastra will be returning as as a surveying rep. And for NGOs, Tanya Nolte from New Jersey Conservation Foundation will be returning, or she's replacing Mike, but returning. She's been on the board before, and replacing Mark Gaddy is replacing Dom. So Mark Gaddy is with the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. And I guess I was going to ask everyone if you're gonna introduce your, well, you know what, if you can, I thought that we would, those folks who are new, we'll start with you. Is Tanya on the line? I cannot see.
Trish, why don't you turn off the agenda so that the cameras come bigger?
Oh, yeah, okay, that's good.
Trish, I don't think Tanya was able to make this meeting.
Okay, so you, all right. I'm gonna stop sharing then. And so, yeah, so now if any of the, I'm not sure how to do this, but we were gonna ask everyone on the executive committee just to turn on your camera and unmute and say hello. So we will do that. Andy's there. Say hi, Andy.
Hello.
And I'm Trish, and already introduced myself. For the education constituency group, that is Dave Tullett. Is Dave on the line? I don't see his name, but Dave, if you're there, you could chime in any minute. We have a vacancy on the municipal constituency group. So if anyone knows anyone, let us know. County group is Joe Smalley. See Joe there?
Yep. Hi, Joe Smalley, Middlesex County.
Right.
County group.
For the state group, we have Anne Marie Falkowski.
Hello, Anne Marie. I'm from the DEP.
Great. And for the private group, Galen is up.
Yep, Galen Doherty from Civil Solutions.
And then regional and metropolitan planning organization, that would be Tanya, but Mike, she's not in, right?
Yeah, hi everybody, Mike Shannon. I'm with the Nature Conservancy and I'm finishing out this term.
Yeah, sorry, that's nonprofits. Okay, and then regional.
Nonprofits, yeah, NGO, yep.
Okay, NGOs, regional and metropolitan planning organizations, that is, who's that? Dom. Dom is finishing up his term. And then who do we get? Oh, Mark. Is Mark on?
Hey,
Hey everybody, Mark
Oh,
Gotti
okay.
from DBRPC in
Okay.
Philadelphia.
Great. Welcome, Mark. Thank you. And then Gary is also, he already said hello. All right. So let's see. We're going to go through the task force or any reports, and we'll start with Andy, and he's the state GIO. Andy? Yeah.
good morning. So yeah, I guess the big announcement I was going to make kind of got leaked. I'm retiring officially in February, but I have 6 weeks of vacation to use before that. So in reality, I'm retiring 2 weeks from today, which is exciting. And some friends here arranged a nice tribute board, which I got yesterday and was very touched. So thank you all for that. In terms of business, I've mentioned a couple times here Daniel's Law. And for those of you that missed it, Daniel's Law was passed 2019, I think, in response to an incident where somebody was trying to kill a judge. And the law says that basically you can't post the name and home address of a judge or a prosecutor or a law enforcement officer on the internet. And government agencies aren't supposed to post that information with an effective date of next Friday. So we've been kind of running around dealing with that. The place where that occurs in our data is in the Mod 4, where we have the owner and property address of every property in the state, right? We don't have any way of knowing who's a judge or law enforcement or whatever. So the strategy that we've been going with is to remove all of the owner names from the publicly posted versions of that data. And so we're getting ready to pull the trigger on that. The tax list, the published version of Mod 4 comes out from Division of Taxation once a year. Every other time of year, it's in flight. It's data that's being worked on, but they finalize it and publish it once a year. Because of various business processes in the assessment world, that process takes about 6 months. And so they close the file in January, but then it doesn't get out until summer. And then we take it and use it. We have not yet published this year's tax list because we were holding it while we were waiting to figure out what was going on with Daniel's Law. We're going to do that next week with the names taken out. So the downloadable data that we have on Engine and the publicly exposed web services that have parcel attributes in them, the field will still be there because we don't want to mess up the data structure, but there just won't be anything in it in the owner name. But then, late breaking news, especially for those of you that are wrestling with this same issue on the local level, there are discussions afoot downtown to change the law again. The bill with the amendments has not been introduced. It's still being, drafted, discussed, however that sausage making process works. But it's a big change. If they go ahead with what's being discussed, it will change it to a system where any of the covered individuals, judges and so forth, who want their information redacted have to indicate that. They have to opt in to having their information removed. And if they don't opt in, then their information still gets published along with everything else. That requires there to be a mechanism for them to do that. And so it pushes back the compliance again, probably 6 months at least, maybe more. So the way that this would work is there would be a new entity within state government that would be responsible for administering this thing. And there would be a web portal where the law enforcement people would go in and indicate their preference to be disappeared. And then all of the government records would have some turnaround time to respond to that and remove the name. And I think the turnaround time is like a month or something. Details are still all over the place because, as I said, it hasn't even been introduced. So that, you know, even the first version of the bill isn't finished being written yet. The word was it was supposed to be, you know, real soon now. But it seems quite likely now that they haven't even introduced it, that it will not be signed by Friday, next Friday. So we're going ahead with our changes that we need to make to comply with the current version of the law, but then stay tuned because it could completely change, you know, anytime now. And that's what I know about that. Before I move on, questions about that?
Yeah, there is one question from, who's that from? Or there was, I saw a hand up.
Hi, it's Andrew Lloyd from Mercer County. Thank you. I'm new to the group, and I don't want to take up too much time, but just can't help thinking, you know, I don't know if we have any input into this process, but if we simply were to redact names and then someone knew what they were doing, they could just query out, find out one who didn't have a name, and then they'd have their own little list of law enforcement. So I don't know if there's some way we could interject into that and say, come up with a randomized name or something so there's not a null set. That's all.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. One response is that, you know, the purpose of this was that you couldn't find a particular individual. But yeah, that is an issue, and that is an issue that the people that are discussing it are aware of, and there have been a couple of ideas floated, including having taxation, you know, substitute in a name, you know, because a lot of times if you look particularly at condo properties, you know, the name of the property is, you know, 12 Beach Avenue LLC. And so they could put in something like that that wouldn't be so obviously blank. But I don't know what the decision on that's going to be.
Okay, glad to know people are thinking about it.
Yeah. There's also a question in the chat from Patty Hicks. Is there anything for individuals to opt out? Only individuals that are judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement in the current version of the law. So yeah, beyond the rest of us are still out there.
So Andy, just to clarify, that what you guys did, you redacted all the names though, right?
Yes.
There's no names. Okay. So in that case, well, I know you said it may change, but
right.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and we considered only removing the names from residential property because that, you know, logically would be the only time that it would be their home address. But we weren't sure that we could rely on that attribute being correct all the time because, you know, it probably is, but there are some other attributes in Mod 4 that, you know, aren't. And so we decided to play it safe and remove all the names. And to Matt's question, why New Jersey has taken the lead on this, it was really in response to that one incident where the judge's son was killed by the guy that was coming after her. There are some other states that have similar laws. Derek points out Virginia did it a while back. It was just, it's named Daniel's Law, like because the guy's name was Daniel, and as many laws are in response to a particular tragedy, and then it takes a while to work out whether it's really viable, workable. Because the original version of the thing was not workable. It was, they passed the law and they said compliance had to be immediate. It's like, oh, how do you do that? And then they realized and changed it. And that's where we got this December 10th deadline, was the first amendment to the law. So.
And I see Mike Shanahan, you have your hand up?
I did, yeah. Just quick comment and question. Thank you so much, Andy, for that explanation, especially for the timing of how the data is released. That's helpful with the Mod 4 data. Comment is that this affects a lot of us, especially folks who produce web mapping services, and we operate this conservation blueprint site with partners that has parcel data. So for us, I guess it's either remove all the names or download updated Mod 4 data when it's released. One question: when did you say that you expect that to be released? Is that within the next week or just before the 10th?
To have the bill be introduced to begin.
No, I'm sorry. The data, the updated.
Oh, our data. The data that we are posting, we're going to be posting early next week.
I'm just flagging that for the community, that for us, for lots of us have web services and different applications where we use this data, right? So we're going to have people are probably already in the process of handling this, but it just clarifies what we need to do. Right.
Yeah. And if you are a publisher of data, you might want to go read the law. It's fairly convoluted, as all laws are, but there are different requirements specifically about what government agencies are not allowed to do. And then there are some other requirements elsewhere in the law. It's actually a criminal offense if you intentionally dox an individual judge or law enforcement officer, and say, hey, this person is a law enforcement officer and this is their home address. That's a crime. Publishing it just because you're publishing a bunch of stuff isn't a crime. It's not clear to me what happens in that, if that part of the law gets violated. I don't know what the penalty is, but yeah, you should, if you're publishing names, you might want to read it and see. I wouldn't want to try to give legal advice, even if I were allowed to, and of course I'm not allowed to.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Very helpful.
Yep. I should also mention, next week when we publish this stuff, we've got a number of county parcel data sets that are getting new updates published as well. They'll still be in the usual place. The other thing I wanted to mention, I've mentioned before that there's lots of stuff going on with preparations for Next Gen 911. OIT had an RFP out for building and operating the new 911 network, and the bids on that were opened a couple months ago and have been in that review process since then. The document for the notice of intent to award is being prepared now. So the choice has been made, who the winner is, and they're getting ready to announce that. And then that begins the cycle where there's a period to see if any of the other bidders want to protest it, and then the protests get reviewed. And then once any of those are resolved, they would actually award the contract. So it could be, the fastest would probably be, I'm going to guess, February that they would award the contract. And it's never, of course, the fastest. But sometime hopefully early next year, they will award that contract, and that'll begin the process. They have to light up a fiber network that reaches every 911 center in the state, which is going to take a little bit of building. And then at some point after that, they will be ready to start loading in GIS data into this thing. So that's going to provide a sort of a cutoff point for us to have our preparation work on that data done, and then it goes into a more operational mode where the locals are responsible for updates beyond that point. So it's we're almost to the starting line, basically, is what that means.
Andy, there is a comment from Richards. Says Mod 4 data will still be releasing names. That's a question. Mod 4 data will still be releasing.
The public version, which is called the tax list, will be. They took it down. Actually, you can't get the tax list right now at all because they were trying to figure out how to comply. And then, moving forward, they're going to have to do the same things that the rest of us have to do. So if it does get changed, if the law gets changed, then by next summer when they release the next tax list, it'll have that partial redaction in place. The actual live Mod 4 system isn't exposed to the public, so the names are in there for the government people to use. I believe those were my only two updates. I think Brian has a couple of operational things from the office about services and so forth.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Brian Embley, Jersey Office of GIS. A couple of reminders. A couple of things from New Jersey Office of GIS. I'm going to share my screen real quick. So we have a geocoding service that's been updated earlier in the year. We've talked about it, sent out some announcements. Just a reminder that the new service is called NJDOH. It's really great. We've been updating it with all the good address point data that we and others have been working on the past year. It's using some of the newer technology from Esri, which gives us suggest capability, as you type in address and such. So this one is what we would like you to switch to use if you're not already. The older one is called Address NJ Cascade. We don't update this anymore. It's not getting any data refreshes. It's still out there. We would like to give folks time to switch from the old one to the new one. Just a reminder to do that. There's all the details about using both of these on the Engine website, on the geocoding page, which I'm showing here. So please check that out. Keep that in mind. If you have any apps that use the state geocoder, or if you're using it from a desktop GIS tool, please make sure that you're pointing to the new one, NJ Geocode. All the details about how to use it are here on the page. So that's some updates that we're doing. And generally, from time to time, we have a lot of map services that we run on our GIS servers at the state. And over the last couple of years, as more organizations start to publish their own authoritative content, which is great. Years ago, we used to publish all DEP's content for them. They have that capability now, so they publish it all. That's great. We don't have to do it for them. They're the data steward. Makes sense. So we took down all the DEP data we used to publish. Other organizations are starting to do that. So from time to time, we change our map services, right? Highlands is in the process of publishing their own data that we host for them. Pinelands Commission, we've noticed is doing the same thing. NJ Transit has recently published all their stuff. We don't have to do it for them anymore. So we do these changes from time to time. And the best way to stay abreast of them is, well, we do put everything in the Engine news announcements on the website here. You can follow our Twitter handle, which is engine_info. And we tweet out those updates as well. And then if you prefer to get email notifications, just make sure that you're on the NJGF Discuss email listserv. Most of you are. We had a couple updates on this page, including the email listserv page. It tells you how to add yourself and take yourself off if you would like to do that. If you sign up as a member, which is even better, you know, if you do this registration with the forum, we automatically add you to that, that email list anyway. So be sure to get on that list so that we can keep you abreast of these changes. We would hate for somebody to be dependent on one of our services and not be aware of a change and have an application or solution break. But if you're, you know, if you're not listening, there's only so much that we can get the message out. So that's it. Thanks.
Okay, so that's it for this state GIO report. Thank you, Brian and Andy. Next up is me for federal report. Only thing I have to say is federal budget. There are all sorts of things happening with the Build Better Back and the infrastructure. So there should be money coming through. My agency, I know that we are getting increases in some of our projects, program areas. And as far as returning back to the office, we just got word yesterday about our new telework policy for our agency, for USDA. They're allowing, or at least, yeah, I think anyone can work, well, with some restrictions. They're letting us telework up to 8 days per pay period, which is, I mean, before the pandemic, I could only telework 1 day per pay, 1 day a week, but now I can telework up to 4 days a week. So it's going to be a change for the federal workforce, at least USDA. This, I don't know about the other agencies, but it could be good for a lot of us. Yes. What else? I don't have anything else to report. If anyone has any questions about federal stuff, let me know. I can try to get you the answer. The next person up.
Trish?
No. Yeah. Yep.
Just for those non-federal folks, you should be aware that the continuing resolution for the federal budget runs out tomorrow, and nobody's voted on anything yet. So there is a potential for government shutdown, which nobody seems to want, but nobody's agreed on anything yet. So tomorrow is that ending of federal funding until somebody votes for a new one.
Interesting, Roger. I wasn't sure that's. I knew we were in a CR, but I didn't know it affected all federal. I thought it was maybe just USDA, and I didn't know tomorrow or the deadline was. Okay. Wow. Okay. So we'll see how that goes. All right. The next person who I know who has a report is for the state constituency group. Anne Marie, are you on and available?
She just put it in the chat that she has to leave.
Oh, okay. Okay. I actually have her report, so I can read what she sent me. So the Bureau of GIS, the DEP, will be presenting at the virtual Esri Mid-Atlantic User Group meeting tomorrow. The presentation covers, let's see, how the NJDOH uses drones to collect photos, drone to map to create maps, and ArcGIS Pro to evaluate the restoration of tidal marshes using dredged material. So thanks, Anne Marie. I was not aware of that. That could be good for those who want to know more. Just look at the Esri Mid-Atlantic User Group meeting. And she also says there's a NJDOH web training class on Thursday, January 27th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And you can register by visiting the Bureau of GIS's website and clicking on the training tab. So that's the update from Anne Marie. The other person who I know we have a report from the constituency group is, I think, Gary for the surveyors. Gary, are you on?
Yes, I'm on. Not a report per se, but just a comment I wanted to make. I had a recent conversation with somebody regarding if there was any regulations within New Jersey to say how GIS professionals can collect data versus how surveyors can collect data. It was a very good question. I think a good topic to bring up and a good discussion to have. I know as far as the surveyors go, we have many regulations that we have to adhere to. The state has some regulations, the DEP has regulations, DOT has a manual of regulations, and that's something that we as surveyors use daily depending on the projects we're working on. But as far as I know, I don't think there is any written down information or regulations regarding any other collection of data by anybody else other than surveyors. So maybe it's a discussion we could start. So I just wanted to pose that question, and if anybody has interest or has any information regarding that maybe I'm not aware of, just forward that to me. I know Pennsylvania and some other states have proceeded with this and have pretty good language already put together. So maybe that's just something we can utilize in the future to maybe have a discussion between the surveyors and GIS professionals. So thank you, Trish.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. I do know, especially through the ERISA channels, that other states have talked about that kind of thing, and I think definitely something for the forum to consider, and maybe I don't know if it's a task force or just a meeting discussion, but that's very relevant to those
Good.
of us. Yeah.
Yes, I'll keep tabs on it, and then we'll talk in exec, and then we'll see where it goes from there. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? Any other constituency group reports? If not, then I'll move on to the task forces. And I didn't hear from, actually I didn't check up on the task forces to see, but if any, if the geodetic task force, the elevation task force or trails task force has any reports. I do know we have one. Why don't we start with Dom maybe? Do you want to say something about the utilities, the public works new task force? Say a word.
Sure, Trish, that's fine. Yeah, so we've been in conversation with I guess the rest of the groups that I've been communicating with. As far as like getting this started. So pretty much I use your template that you gave me yesterday. So here's a draft of our mission statement to develop metadata field standards that will span across multiple utility industries, such as wastewater, storm, water, etc., and in turn will help maintain utility assets within the state's utility communities, utilizing field standards common to everyday use, right? And then a couple of points that I want to point out: goals, identify stakeholders' needs, and use cases for specific industries. Develop schema and fields that are common to specific industry, and thus in turn can be utilized by our GIS community. Provide open discussion of data standards or what we envision that standards will be, right? And then we go on to look at inventory existing sewer, storm, water, etc., that constitutes these industries and how we can leverage existing standards. For example, NASCO, PACP, and all that stuff. And see how we can actually, ingest and integrate that. Develop standardized attribution fields using existing schema, right? We can work from, existing, schemas that's made available from, Esri or other, industries out there, right? Because we do use, a modified version of the Esri's, schema, at our facility. All right, so to continue, identify the process of how we can update the fields, right, once we get there. Host and collaborate with other agencies who would like to input, in the process. And then talking to, I forget who it was, I think it was Andrew. Develop watershed-based modeling for both storm and wastewater, and integrate that stormwater data into the national hydro data set. So that's what we have so far. It's in draft form, and then we'll get back to you as far as finalizing stuff, on this, potential task force.
Great. Thanks, Dom. So yeah, this is a new task force, and Dom just put together the goals and missions for us, and we'll put those up on the forum website, and Maya can set things up so that people who want to join that task force can do that.
If I can add one more thing, Trish, we can probably potentially branch out to the specific, industries, because it could become cumbersome or complex, right?
Yeah.
So stormwater could have its own, sewer could have its own, water could have its own, right? And then head that up by, different subsets of that, of the utility task force.
Okay, good. So keep your ears and eyes out for notice about that task force through the forum. Anyone else? Roger, you have an elevation report for us?
I have several items, and thank you, Dom, for mentioning that. I've been involved in talking with Andrew Lloyd and Andrew Filippi of Princeton Township regarding some flooded roadways and bridges, and trying to integrate culverts into a data set that might be expanded statewide. That's been a thought of mine for some period of time. So using the elevation data, obviously, to create hydrography is something that USGS is very much involved with now on several pilot projects, including one in central Pennsylvania. I wanted to mention that John Tarowski has been involved for a while now, trying to gather funding, and I've got a statement here that I'll read. New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection has decided to pursue a LiDAR collection refresh on the 6 Northeast counties, Bergen, Essex, Hudson, Middlesex, Monmouth, and Union for the 2023 collection season. This will provide time to collect partner funding from state, regional, and county agencies to supplement the funding match from the 3DEP program. The refresh cycle is typically 8 years, so this will actually exceed that. But the deadline for early application and flying this season has already passed, and due to the continuing resolution, only a few projects have been selected. So it's better to plan to do next season and gather our resources for that, or John will anyhow. And thanks for John and Doug and Angela for providing that. They're also talking about upgrading to quality level 1 and funding dependent. That will be of part of the pursuit to gather a proposal for the broad agency announcement for 3DEP in the coming months. In addition, another collection, the 4 DVRPC counties, and I know Will and I think Glenn is on the call, so Burlington, Camden, and Gloucester, and one other county, Mercer County, sorry, is also up for collection next time. So John will be investigating the potential for gathering funding from that group and possibly DVRPC in collection to update that 4-county area in the Philly metropolitan area. 2 other quick notes. The National Federation for Wildlife is doing a March topobathymetric collection along parts of the coast, and I will get a map of that potential collection area, but it's wetland focused. And next summer, in the middle of the summer, the Corps of Engineers is on their 5-year cycle to collect topobathymetric data for the ocean facing coastline of New Jersey. Both of these projects are willing to take on individual project areas with funding if you want to add them to those collections. So give me a shout, and I will be happy to connect you up with the relevant people. The NIFWIF collection is being contracted out of the USGS St. Petersburg Coastal Geologic Science Center. And the Corps of Engineers is run out of Stennis down in Mississippi. And that's what I have for the Elevation Task Force.
All right. Thank you, Roger. Lots of good information there. And again, if anybody missed some of that, this meeting will be recorded, so we can listen to that again. What else do we? Oh, and also we have minutes from these meetings. So, all right. Any other reports from task force folks?
Yes, Trish, I have a report from the Trails Task Force.
Okay.
This was on behalf of Tanya Nolte, the co-lead of that task force. So she provided a written, I'll just read her short written report. The DEP has received deliverables from Civil Solutions and is working through the process of publishing the first version of a statewide trails data set. Publication is likely to occur in early 2022. So this coming year, that's just a month away now. We'd like to thank everyone who has contributed data to date. A core group of the task force is working on a procedure for maintaining the data set with the goal of having an update completed annually, tied to the National Trails Day, which is the first Saturday in June. We'll be reaching out to existing data providers for data updates and are continually looking for additional sources to fill in data gaps. The team also hopes to address ways to develop a more robust and complete data set, which will involve ongoing collaboration with data providers. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, and I think we might want to hear from, get a presentation about that new data set at some time in 2022. We could talk to Tanya about that.
Yeah, we will. Thank you, Trish, for mentioning that. We actually talked about that as a forum to do it at this meeting. It didn't come to fruition, but that it's an exciting, development that this data set's going to really be published. So it's maybe at the next either January or spring meeting. So I'll loop back to Tanya on that.
Yep, sounds good. All right. Thank you. All right. At this point in the meeting, we are open for discussion or announcements from anyone who has anything to say. I guess just unmute, raise your hand, I guess, and I don't see any hands raised, so I'm gonna move on. I do see there. Oh, do I see a hand?
Yeah. Hey, Trish.
Okay, hi, Glenn.
How you doing?
Good.
Thanks, Roger, for that update about the LiDAR. I'm sure I'll get in touch with John at some point. But I just want to say, I think he's on the call. I believe he is. My boss, Will Stevens, is on the call, but he might be too shy to say it. But I'll say it on his behalf. Will is retiring at the end of the month after 37 years at DVRPC. And just wanted to let those who know Will know that if they hadn't heard already. And of course, we're going to miss him and his guidance. And but I'll still probably call him anyway, just to bug him. So thanks a lot, Trish.
All right. Yeah.
And Andy, and congratulations to Andy too, by the way.
Congratulations, Will.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Mark, for chiming in. Do I see another? Okay. No, I don't. But congratulations to you, Will. Been a while. All right. So I think we're at the part of the presentation where we have our scheduled speaker and the presentation. And this month it's our own Andy Rowan and Brian Embley. They are presenting, and I will let them get started.
Thank you, Trish. Get this going here. So you're aware, we've mentioned previously that OGIS has been supporting Department of Health through the pandemic on their data presentation for COVID-related things. So we just wanted to look back on that, and it's been kind of a wild ride for us. So we just wanted to describe how that's been and some of the things we learned and some of the things we realized made it less painful than it could have been. And Brian and I are just going to kind of jump on each other as we do this. So if you haven't visited the dashboard, this is what it looks like. This is the current instantiation of it. It's been pretty constantly evolving, and we'll get into some details as we go, but you can see there's a lot of stuff going on there. There's tabs with different categories of data, and then within each tab there are more tabs, and you can filter on age groups and all sorts of crazy things, and it's all packed into this one user interface. And my boss keeps asking me, how come it looks bad when I look at it on my iPhone? A lot of challenges there. So we're just going to kind of take through that experience. So OIT has a project management office with, formally trained PMP certified project managers, and mostly they get involved in the huge multi-million-dollar projects that the state government launches, replacing Mod 4 and other fun exercises. And so they have a lot of, really elaborate process that they use on those monster projects. OGIS doesn't typically get involved in projects of that size, PAMS being the exception, but there are still some fundamentals of project management that matter even on smaller projects. You might not need all the process, but you still do need some of the fundamentals. And certainly the biggest one is get the business requirements nailed down before you start. In other words, figure out what you're trying to accomplish before you start thinking about how you're going to accomplish it. And then, the project manager says, okay, and then, you write that up in great detail and you get everybody to sign off on it. And then it's locked in. And later on, as you're moving through the project, when they realize they want something different, you have the scope document and you go, okay, that's not in there. You want to paint it black now, but not in there for it to be painted black. So, that's going to cause this other change. And do you really want that? And it gives a way to avoid scope creep, where you're just constantly shifting what you're doing and having to redo things that you did before. And part of that also is for the database, and hopefully everybody here thinks about this. Before you go building a database, you give some thought to how it's going to be used, what it needs to be able to deliver before you build it. And that's part of the process in a formal project, and it's also just something that we always do. And then the other big thing is the schedule. You figure out the schedule, and again, this is the project manager talking, right? You write up, they've got formal ways to present this, and you have a schedule, and it's got milestones, and we're going to have this piece done by now, and then it's going to have a period for testing it, and then it's going to have a period for user acceptance, and then we go to production. That's the ideal case, right? And
right.
It never
and
really.
If I could jump in, Andy, like in our office, when we start projects, we try to follow this, right? I mean, that first one about business requirements is pretty huge. It's not just project management. Like, there's a whole field on enterprise architecture that drills in how to gather requirements and align technology with them. And we don't do all this because we like doing extra work around managing the project. We do it because we've done a lot of solution projects over the years, and when we don't follow this, we usually get burned in some way. It doesn't meet expectations, or it doesn't work properly, and just kind of following these guidelines helps the customer get what they want, right? And it also helps us, the service provider, from being stuck in an awkward situation where the thing doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So we're very familiar with this approach, and we use flavors of it in our, all of our project work. And we get real nervous when we get forced outside of that because, we have the scars.
Yeah. And, I should also have mentioned at the beginning, Brian and I are the ones up here talking about this, and we were involved in the project, but more in the mode of, having the loose hand on the steering wheel. Really, the ones who pulled this off were Steph Bossitz and Derek Bidarf and Deepa Sanjuvaraya. Brian and I had the luxury of just being able to let them run with it. My role actually primarily was, fending off the executives, telling him, no, we're not going to be able to do the insane thing that you're asking us to do tonight. Keeping it from being a situation where we, stayed up all night every night doing this. So this is the PM approach. You may have guessed that where we're headed with this is that that's not how this one went. So, it started out as an emergency, and it continued to be treated as an emergency. And even now, over at DOH, it essentially is still an emergency, and they're still in the mode that you get in an emergency, which is, what do I have to deal with right now? And that's, they've never been able to come up out of that water, even now, because it's just always something coming at them. But a little different from, we in GIS, or at least in our office, when you talk about what's an emergency where GIS is going to be needed, the first thing we usually think of is a natural disaster, right? There's a hurricane coming, or there's flooding, or something like that. And so we've thought about those, and we've thought about, what we're going to need for those. And we kind of know where to go and what to do with those. This one, I don't know about others. I had not honestly given much thought to, what's a pandemic like, and what do you do? How do you respond? And the fact that it's still an emergency a year and a half later makes it's very different. But we're suddenly working on something that's absolutely in the limelight. Everybody wants to know. I mean, if you think back to the early days of this, everybody's like, and even for ordinary folks, they also sort of know, okay, if there's a hurricane coming, I'm going to go look at the Weather Channel and see, what they're telling me about how bad it is, and they have a sense of what they're going to need to do if it gets bad. This one was like, well, do I need to not breathe? Do I need to not touch anything? I don't know what to do. I don't know how bad it is. I don't even know where to go to find out how bad it is. And in comes DOH to respond to that.
Right. If you can put your mind in that time frame, I think March 2020, right? I was like others thinking, well, what's the spread? We heard about it's in New York City. We're right next door. Is it spreading across New Jersey? And that was like the first element of the dashboard, trying to track it through counties as it spread, that DOH had put up. And then, to strike home the high visibility thing that Andy mentioned, the governor is doing daily briefings at 1 p.m. about the pandemic and response and sharing information, and this dashboard would often get shown, right? So it would be, the call would be that we need this thing for the dashboard because the governor's going to show it in 3 hours. Like, make it work, and don't make it wrong, because the press was watching the daily briefings, right? And they would use that for their information to disseminate, out through their press channels. So pretty high visibility, pretty high pressure, not to screw it up.
Right. Yeah. So the lead on this naturally was Department of Health, and so when kind of thankfully for us, when the governor wanted something on this, he would go to the commissioner of Department of Health, and OIT was sort of, well, we're helping you as we can, but everybody acknowledged that it was their game, right? And so early on, before the pandemic, Department of Health has always had some GIS capability, but it was, it's always been fairly limited. There was somebody that many of you may know in the Health Emergency Management Office named Jonas Miller. And Jonas was great, and we had worked with him some, for a few years before the pandemic. So when the pandemic hit, they had Jonas, but that was pretty much it. There were a couple of other GIS people in the department, but they weren't involved in this. And so Jonas is pulling this stuff off more or less on his own. And we would offer to help, and he would go, yeah, as soon as I stop dealing with this, I'll let you know how you can help. He was too busy to ask for help. Then Jonas left. Jonas got another job. He works for the city of Philadelphia now in their health department. And for a while, when Jonas left, the maintenance of what got stood up, which we'll talk about in a minute, got handed off to the webmaster. And, he's a webmaster. He's not a GIS guy. So that was hard for him. And that was mostly when we started getting involved more. And then they did bring in a GIS specialist who had been in another part of the department. They sort of drafted him into this activity. And so he's getting into that increasingly as we go. But still, it's not enough, right? It's never enough. So OGIS has remained involved in that. So the first thing that happened right away in March was, they needed some way to present this stuff on the web. And so they put together a dashboard in ArcGIS Online to get it out. And then that became the place that they went to add more stuff. Oh, now we need this other thing. Let's add it to the dashboard.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? If any of you have worked with those operational dashboards in AGO, they're really easy to configure and set up, and they look great, maps and charts. You can stand up products very quickly. Kudos to Esri. Like, think about the Johns Hopkins dashboard, right? The whole world was watching as the pandemic started and really flared. So the tools were really great, and it enabled that quick response from Department of Health. And then it was such a good tool for that. It almost was a victim of its own success in that they started shoving everything that they could through these ops dashboards because they could, and because it was something they could handle, and it was easy enough that, with limited staff, they could make it happen. But then the end result becomes a lot of information stuffed in an unwieldy interface that you have to manage. So interesting phenomenon there with those ops dashboards.
Yeah. And so if you think back on how the whole adventure went, the focus changed as we moved through, right? At first it was, where are the cases breaking out? And then it was, are there going to be enough beds in the hospital? Is there enough protective equipment in the hospital? And then, eventually we got to, okay, vaccinations, how's that going? Who's getting vaccinated? Who's not? And on. And so throughout this, it was just like wave after wave coming in of new requirements, new stuff. Here's some more data, figure out how to put it on the map and and get it into the system. And it was always, you know, it's an emergency, right? We need this as soon as you can. And the DOH people were given the circumstances, they were quite reasonable. If we said, you know, this is going to take us a week, they would go, okay. And then, you know, a week later, they would want it. So we had to be very careful when we made those estimates, not to be too optimistic. And we always had to, you know, sort of factor in, you know, what might go wrong as we moved through. Because although they were understanding when whatever we would say, they would pretty much say, okay, you know, if we said it was going to take us 3 weeks, okay, they took us at our word that it would take us 3 weeks. They did not want it to take 4 weeks if we said 3. Because in the meantime, they've said to the governor, well, this is going to be ready 3 weeks from now. And, you know, he's a pretty nice guy, but, you know, he's the governor. He wants what he's told he's going to get. So, yeah, the only constant was that we need it right away.
Yeah, and if I could, Andy, we're usually called in to help folks with projects like this. What we like to do is try to jump in to help where we can and empower the data owner folks so that they can do this themselves. So they don't need to call us every time they need to update something. You know, help the DOH folks learn the tools. But like Andy said, there wasn't a deep bench of GIS expertise over there, and everybody was scrambling to get the latest information out. So we could kind of see, all right, there's no one really to hand off. We're in this for the whole ride, and we're still on the ride. You know, since March 2020.
Yep. It has settled down some, but you know, there still are periodic urgent requests, shall we say. So looking back, you know, as we got into this, so the first thing, just like with everybody else, it was, you know, okay, everybody stay home. So we stayed home. And, you know, we knew that Jonas was doing stuff, but we weren't really tuned in to the specifics. And then we started noticing that all of our ArcGIS servers started falling over. And we weren't really, at first we weren't sure why. We just knew, you know, upset, this one's rebooting, or it's just not responding, or
yeah, that was really frustrating because I remember being here late troubleshooting. You know, in our team, we've got a lot of folks who, together with decades of experience running ArcGIS servers, we didn't know what was happening. It would stop, we would restart the systems, they would work, and then they would crash again. And we'd never experienced that from a volume problem, too many requests overloading the system. So it took us a little while to figure that out. You know, looking back, it's kind of funny and then embarrassing. That wasn't the first thing that we thought, but we'd never encountered that kind of load before.
And we didn't know, you know, what happened was the DOH dashboard got published, and, you know, the usage went up some, and then their communications people started putting it out on social media that the dashboard was there. So it went out on Facebook, and then boom. Suddenly our servers are crashing.
Right, so they were using the county boundary layer from us.
Right.
Because
and
why
we didn't
wouldn't
know
you, right?
it was out on Facebook until we saw it on Facebook.
Yeah.
So yeah, what we figured out was that the county boundary data that they were using was an item that we had published in ArcGIS Online, but it was coming off of our server live. It was not a hosted layer in ArcGIS Online. And, you know, Jonas was doing what we encourage everybody to do, which is don't worry about data updates, just use the canonical source, right? We wanted everybody to be using our reference data rather than carving off a copy and then, having it be out of date. So Jonas had done that, and that's why we were crashing. So the solution was not to have it on our server. So cloud computing to the rescue.
Yeah. Yeah, so we just published a hosted feature service in ArcGIS Online. That scalable elastic backend that they have there really saved us on this. So that worked out great, and that's what's still powering the dashboard. That's how we publish content for the dashboard today, even as we make updates.
And so, we're talking about, millions of hits on this thing. And, we have our infrastructure scaled for what our, normal load is. And we've got a fair amount of reserve relative to our normal load, but nothing like this. And, this is one of the big benefits of cloud computing is that that scaling can be, just effortless, automatic. If you're hosting your own stuff in Amazon, you have to pay for it when it scales. If you're hosting stuff in ArcGIS Online, that cost is there, but it's not on your bill. So that works. So we got that, and then everybody was happy again. And then the next adventure was a while later, but it was the first of the, okay, let's add another thing to the dashboard. And this one was, people started wanting to know what the status was in hospitals. So how do you do that? Well, you have to get every hospital to report in every day what their status is. And so DOH didn't normally hear from hospitals every day. So they had to put something together. And so they went to the New Jersey Hospital Association and worked with them to get a portal where all the hospitals had a place, because that was already partially in place. And the hospitals went in every day and updated, a suite of information about, bed availability, ICU. There was a whole long list of things that they were supposed to update every day. Then next challenge was, okay, how do we get that? It's over, in a different system. How do we get that over into the dashboard? And it has to be updated every day. So we don't want this to be something has to happen manually. We're always looking for ways to automate this.
Right. So notice the product here. It's not even a map, right? It's a chart. So we're already moving out of using GIS to do spatial things. But again, it was the tool that the health had and could use quickly, and everything's got to be ready for the next briefing. So our team did some great work with the hospital folks in reaching out to their database every day through a script that Steph wrote that grabs data and crunches it and then posts it up to Health's AGO as a feature service that the dashboard consumes, right? So there's a Python script in the middle that runs every day, still runs. And all that works great. We have to, monitor it. A couple things there that were interesting to me was, working with enterprise systems for so long and knowing all the IT best practices. Some of those best practices, get thrown aside here, right? Just to make this work. Like the Hospital Association has this great database where they corral all this information, and they were willing to give us access to it. But we had to get creative with firewalls and access to that database from our systems that might make some IT security people a little nervous. But, it had to get done, public health issue. So that got done. And because of the way all that kind of data flow and the piping there worked, and our script in the middle that was running on our servers that Steph wrote and we own and understand, we knew that this process was one that we were going to have to own. You know, we weren't ever going to be able to give it over to the health people, to that webmaster person that Andy talked about, so that he could own it. We would like to, but it was just too complicated, too many moving parts. It wasn't physically possible to have the networking work over on a health system. So some interesting things that happened there, but it's still running today. It's still working great.
Yep. So I mentioned this earlier, just that, you know, part of the evolution of this was, you know, what's important, what's the important information that the public health people need to get out to the public. And so there was this sort of gradual shift. And early on, it was about the case numbers and that graph that, you know, we all still look at, but, you know, everybody was looking at it every day back then. And then the hospital situation is there. And then, you know, last fall the focus started to be on vaccinations. And then even that evolved over time because, you know, at first it was only these limited groups of people that could be vaccinated. And then that, you know, started broadening out and there's more and more age groups. And then now we want to look at, you know, 11 to 17-year-olds. And then, you know, I don't think we have 5 to 11 on the graph yet, actually. So they'll probably call today and ask for that. And they want it by next Wednesday.
Yeah.
And then, you know, third doses, booster doses, you know, so it continues to evolve as we move through. And so the Vax map, from the beginning, there was, you know, with the Janssen and with the Moderna and forgetting the name of the other 2-dose vaccine. Anyway, with the 2-dose vaccinations, there was, everybody knew, right, there we go, Pfizer. Everybody's going to get 2 doses. And so we have to have 2 maps. So we did that. And this was in, you know, we're trying to stick to templates as much as possible. We didn't want to have to build anything, you know, custom. We wanted to use as much out of the box as we could. And so Derek found a thing that worked where we could tie 2 maps together. If you zoom in on one, it zooms in on the other. And if we have time, we can go live with it at some point here. But so in terms of data flow, now we're talking about, you know, whereas before the case numbers were, it was an ad hoc thing that had gotten stood up specifically to report for COVID cases. And we were just tapping into that. For vaccinations, there was an existing system that has been in use over at DOH, internally, of course, for keeping a record of all the vaccinations. And it's called the Immunization Information System. And it's, you know, we've never seen it. We don't know what it looks like or even what it's built on. But, and the reason we haven't seen it is that those are people's individual health records with their names and addresses and their health information in it. So there's no way they're going to let us into that. And we don't want to go into that. But we've got to get the data out of it. And so do they. So DOH, before the map was involved, DOH was already needing to send out this summary information about vaccinations to the local public health people. And so the analytics people in DOH, it's like, well, you know, somebody came to them and said, you know, how can you get me this summary data out of IIS, you know, by tonight? Well, they went with the tools that they were familiar with, and that was Excel, which is never the way you would want to build something if you knew you were going to have to do it every day. Do it every day, again and again, every day. But that's, you know, for that day, that's what they could do. And then it's like, okay, we got to build this thing because we need it right now, and then we haven't got time to do it, the better way, but we'll, when we get a chance, we're going to do it the better way. And they haven't gotten a chance yet, right? Because another emergency came and they had to do something else. So that's the struggle that DOH has been under all this time, is that there's never any time to prepare anything. So there's a pretty ugly looking pivot table that comes out with the summary data on that. And then we have to do something to take the ugly pivot table and make it into the thing that we could use in our GIS system, right? So Python to the rescue, and Steph did her wizardry on that to make, again, an automatic, not scheduled. It had to be fired manually, but it did all the transformations to move it into the form that we needed. And we used a kind of an ugly looking data structure in the feature service in order not to have to build any custom logic in the app. We did some non-normal things in the structure of the feature layer to get it where we could symbolize it in this two-toned map here.
Yeah, that was squeezing all these changes into this interface was tough, right? Because it started out with just the two maps, and then you could see the current age breakdown and those map filter buttons on the top. We would have lots of discussions with the health folks who were like, well, can we show this? And what about that? And would it be great? And we're thinking, well, how are we going to get this into this little bit of screen real estate that we have and not add, dozen more map tabs to the thing? So there was a lot of thought behind that and trying to figure out, Derek's playing with the options in the interface, and then us also having to say to the health folks, we're just not going to be able to fit that in any reasonable way. And here we are, there's still a lot crammed into these two little maps inside, which is one dashboard inside the larger dashboard itself.
Yeah. And then the other thing that's happening here, behind the scenes, so that the official system in New Jersey, all of the health providers are all, plugged into that, and the mechanisms are in place for them. Whenever they're giving a vaccination, it makes its way into that system through those standard processes. I got a booster shot over across the river in Pennsylvania, and it's still not in my record. Because, over in Pennsylvania, they report stuff to the Pennsylvania Department of Health. And then there is a way that the states pass information back and forth to each other. Obviously a separate channel from the one that all of the in-state stuff goes into. And I don't know what that process looks like. And for the most part, we were insulated from any of those issues. We would just, here's your daily pivot table out of Excel, and everything else was invisible to us. Except every once in a while, we would figure out that something was wrong. And one of the things we discovered was that the data that was coming in from out of state wasn't geocoded. And it was being referenced by zip code rather than municipality. And again, this is the kind of thing, you say that to a GIS person, they're like, oh yeah. I said that to my boss, and he was like, well, what's the difference? Because he lives in a town where that zip code is that town. So he thought it was the same thing. And I explained, well, you don't live in Princeton, do you? Where the zip code is, 5 towns around Princeton. And he was like, oh yeah. And this is the kind of thing we deal with all the time, and not everybody does, right? So, those kinds of things are the kinds of things you would address in the pre-planning, right? If there was any pre-planning. So, we addressed it. but it's part of the ongoing fund.
Yeah, so I added this just to kind of reiterate how much is going on in this dashboard. You know, if you go to covid19.nj.gov, there's a lot of information conveyed through this dashboard. Look at all the tabs along the top there. You know, we were just looking at the vaccination maps, but as you go through, there's so many tabs along the top that there has to be a little extra drop down on the right to show you the other tabs. It wouldn't fit along the top, there's so many. And health just you know, puts more useful information in there. Different groups are like, hey, can you put this on the dashboard? You know, there's a lot of non-GIS reports in it now from other internal business systems that they have, reporting on different metrics, like this nice chart and graph here, and these metrics come, you know, that's not GIS data, that's coming out of some other internal business system that they have. And all the information is relevant and good and people need it, but the application itself is pretty unwieldy at this point. It's hard to kind of keep things in sync and make changes. And really what they did, from what they ended up doing was, you know, there's a bunch of dashboards, some that are embedded in other dashboards that are then embedded in an Esri story map to kind of bring it all together. And, you know, some months ago we would work with them and say, hey guys, this thing's getting a little unwieldy. Do you want to stop, pause, and can we think about organizing it a little cleaner so it's easier to maintain, because we're going to be doing this for a while? And everybody liked the idea, but nobody had the time to stop and reevaluate, you know, and maybe do it better, because it was just every day, got to get it out, got to get the data out. So, you know, it's out there and it's working. But if there was, you know, if this was designed from the beginning, I think it would have a totally different look and feel. And also have given some thought to like maintenance of all these parts. Like there's so many business owners contributing to this thing, and it's hard to know when graph or dashboard XYZ needs updating, who's responsible for that, you know?
Yeah.
A lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Definitely that. Yep. So, kind of summarize, various challenges throughout, and, you know, keeping in mind, you know, we're all humans, right? And this was especially an issue at the beginning. You know, we're all freaking out about this thing. There's this disease that people are dying from, and it, you know, popping up all over the place. And, you know, we're all, it's like, okay, don't go to the office, don't go to the grocery store, you know, stay in your house, don't breathe in too deeply, you know, stay away from people. And then at the same time, we are, you know, working on publishing the statistics about where are the people dying the most. And, you know, we got over it, we got better, but that was part of the challenge. Certainly the pace of change and the requirements was a challenge. I mean, as we've described, you know, far from the usual way where you are able to sort of first think about what you're trying to do, you know, holistically. This was definitely, you know, IT people use the expression a lot that they're building the airplane at the same time they're flying the airplane. And that was very definitely what was happening here. And the understandable impatience for turnaround, right? It's like, this needs to happen fast. And so, you know, we need this change. It's urgent. You have to add this thing. And, you know, we're adding stuff and we're like, well, you know, what if it breaks it? So we need to test, but we also know we have to get it out there fast, but then it's going to be really embarrassing if we miss something and it's broken, you know, because then it's, you know, 1 o'clock and the governor's on the air and announces this new thing that they've added to the dashboard, and all the reporters rush over to their computers and turn it on, and something's wrong with it.
Right. We had to bite our tongues a lot around best practices that we, having been ingrained in our heads over the years, and that we use every day, just because the turnover was so quick and the urgency was so strong.
Yeah. But, a lot of it was also that we had to rely on, remembering this is the way we do this to keep it from going badly. We just have to do it faster, and try not to skip the things that can't be skipped. And yeah, I mean, on the last slide we were talking about this problem. The user interface. Normally, you want to give a lot of thought to the user interface, right? How do you make this thing flow well? How do you make it easy for people to understand?
Yeah, there's a lot in there. And if you go to any business owner at health, they just say, well, we need that one chart, or we need that one report. It has to be there. And okay, it does.
Right. And the system isn't designed for, multiple pages. It's all in the one thing. So we have to add user interface elements to control switching from the tab inside the tab. And, working with the data was a real challenge. And, pulling off data transformations to get stuff out of all these different sources that were, designed to do something else. And, we need to pull stuff out and transform it on the fly to get it into the kinds of data structures that the dashboard could understand. And, those are changing. It was, ground was moving under our feet. And then the best practices of how do you do change management. We have a fairly disciplined process that we use when we put something either on premise or in ArcGIS Online. We have separate environments for testing, another one for staging and user acceptance, and then the production environment. And we can make a change in dev, and production is still the same, right? It still works. And we roll things up, and we keep track of where they are. We have everything all sort of regulated. And ArcGIS Online, you can do that in ArcGIS Online. It's a matter of a disciplined practice. It's not, the system doesn't make you do anything in any particular way. And we've got, we're logging into the ArcGIS Online tenant that belongs to DOH to do this stuff. They're logging into it too, and they're doing different other stuff. And we would be saying, what's this thing over here that's got this odd name? Somebody else created it. And it was hard to have that disciplined practice across, spread across two organizations that, don't work together. And some of the people that were getting in there, we don't know who they were. We don't, it's their thing, right? We're the guest, and, we didn't know everything that was going on in there.
Yeah, and the risk there is one that, whoops, somebody deletes a dashboard that's important, that's part of the whole dashboard. Like, whoops, that would be horrific. Luckily, we haven't seen that happen, or at least we don't know about it.
Right.
But there were some questionable examples of maps or charts that were published. It's hard to know by who, that might be using some older data sources that we had published, maybe as a test some months previous, testing out some of the new data changes coming out of health. So there's a real risk there that other frontline products are getting created over data that's old or out of date or not correct. I mean, we had some stuff that was just some data, some services that were just labeled test, in the description, right in the title, boom. But some people would start using it for products. It's risky in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what did we learn? We learned a lot. First thing, yeah, hooray for cloud computing.
Yeah.
The just unimaginable spikes in load on this thing that we just didn't have to worry about. So the scalability of cloud computing was just incredibly valuable here, but also the ready-made, and props to Esri here for the ready-made tools, the templates and other things that are in ArcGIS Online now. We relied so heavily on those templates and samples to do this thing and avoid having to build stuff.
Yeah, and that was, like we said, a double-edged sword though too, because some other folks not as disciplined were in there using those tools, just throwing things out, maybe not making the right things or not using the right data. They're that easy to use. It's easy to build the wrong thing.
Right.
I should say.
Right. And then the other thing is the importance of preparation on this. I had a friend who used to have this on his office wall. It's not the perfect quote, but the point is, a lot of your ability to react to things unexpected is based on just having basic preparations in place. And so part of that is the actual stuff. We had municipal boundary data out already published, county boundary data out already published. We mentioned the issue about having to change the way that it was published to accommodate the load, but we didn't have to worry about where that data was. We already had it. Everybody knew where it was, and the means to publish it. The fact that we needed to switch to a cloud-hosted version of the county boundary, absolutely as fast as we could, because nothing was working until we did. Wasn't hard. Once we figured out what to do, it was like, okay, push the button, publish it. Okay, call Jonas, tell him to change it. Problem is solved. And as I mentioned, all the templates and tools there, you get these things ready in advance. I'm among other things, one of my recreational hobbies is scuba diving. And when you go through the training for scuba diving, one of the things they hammer into you is every time you suit up, do it the same way. The weight belt can go on one way or it can go on the other way. Always put it on the same way. Because if you need to take it off, you don't want to have to try to remember which hand is going to unbuckle it. It's always this hand, and you practice that, right? You're out in the water, you got to drop the belt, you use that hand. And you have everything where you know it's going to be, and you develop habits, and this is the way we do things. And when it's an emergency, that kind of thing really makes a difference. And so a lot of what we were able to do, we were just doing the stuff that we always do. We were just hurrying. And that matters a lot. So having the team accustomed to following certain practices avoided a lot of problems.
Yeah, we have some pretty thorough procedures in our shop of how we build apps and publish data. Dev stage prod, like Andy said, there's documentation steps along the way. Sometimes I have to be the one like, hey, did you fill out the documentation form for that thing that you just published? But because we're used to that allowed us to be responsive and not have things break at the press conference, at 1 p.m. today.
Yeah. And then, speaking as the manager here, the other key element here that is absolutely vital is you got to hire the right people.
Yep.
Brian and I, when this thing hit, Brian and I were like, what are we going to do? And he was like, we got this. You know, we're going to, this is who we need. We need this person to do this part. We need that person to do that part. Let's go. And off we went. So.
Yeah. And part of the challenge was saying, guys, no, don't work on this weekend.
Yeah.
Put it down. It's okay. We have a timeline. You can pick it up on Monday. Everybody's fired up and trying to help.
Yep. Absolutely.
Great team.
Yep. Proud of our team.
So one final thought that I have is, you know, we wanted to share this because this dashboard's so high profile. It's the highest profile thing maybe we've ever dealt with. And all these challenges along the way, but it's still going. Like it's still out there, still providing value since March 2020. So what is that, a year and 9 months? You know, despite all these challenges and lessons that we've learned, health still uses it. The press is still looking at it. The governor sometimes refers to it. Still working.
Yeah. And, you know, we are aware of some of the little burps and warts and stuff, but I think overall it's been hugely successful. You know, there haven't been, you know, it never crashed. There would be times when, you know, people would say it's a little slow, and it was a little slow because we had just reloaded the data. Mm-hmm. But then, you know, the caching would happen and it would go back to normal. And, you know, even when there was a ridiculous number of people looking at it, it just kept working. So.
Right. And kudos to Esri jumping in every now and then to help out the health folks, you know, over that year and 9 months, and still available because they want to see it successful. And then, you know, the health folks, they're working in a realm that, you know, they're not IT specialists. A lot of this is new to them. They're just trying to get the information out there that their boss says they need to publish. So even with all this, you know, chaos swirling around, they're doing their job and getting it out there.
Yeah, and they were good about, you know, they were staying up all night doing this stuff. I mean, you know, Jonas actually probably jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire because he just went to another Department of Health. But the webmaster throughout this thing, you know, you could tell he was stressed because he was just always on the line on this thing. And then he went out on medical leave and then he retired.
Right.
But they were good.
We knew this wouldn't end, right, Andy? We knew that this wasn't a project that was going to stop when we got to the deadline, and we just pushed the deadline. We're done. It's a year and 9 months. It's still going. So, you know, burnout is an issue there.
But they were good about understanding that we weren't necessarily ready to stay up all night.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, back to what I was saying about the deadline, you know, they would say, you know, we need this as soon as you can. What is as soon as you can? And then if I would say that it was going to be a little while, they would say, okay. They didn't say, well, what if you stayed up all night? What if you know, it's Friday, you're telling me you can do it on Monday. What if you like work tomorrow and do it tomorrow? They never did that to us.
Yeah.
They expressed to us that it was urgent, but they never said they didn't care about our other lives or whatever. You know, we were able to stop working when it was time to stop working. So I'm glad for that. It did take a little bit of, you know, pushing back sometimes, and that was my job. But for the most part, they didn't make it too hard to push back when I needed to. So it went okay.
Yeah.
And that's what we have.
Yeah. So go check out the dashboard. Now you know a little bit of what's behind it.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys. There are some comments in the chat. In particular, I guess there's one from Andrew. He wants to know if you have time. I'm curious how you handle the zip code municipal offset. That's something, remember you mentioned that, Andy, about zip code stuff and municipal, you know, where
Right.
the was happening?
Right. So we didn't handle it because the fix for that is to go back to the individual source records, which we didn't have access to. So what ended up happening on that was, they gave us the data, the summary data, and we put it into the map in the test version. And we're looking at the test version. We're like, something's wrong up in here, and figured out what was happening. We didn't know why it was happening. Told them, hey, look at this, something's wrong here. And they were like, oh yeah, this is this problem with the zip codes. We didn't know that it was done by zip codes. And so then we said, okay, then we can't publish it until you go back and fix that. So we didn't actually have to address it ourselves. We just understood it.
Yeah, Patty Hicks also makes a comment about her experience, and yeah, it's just all about managing disaster data and emergency data. And a couple more comments here. Yeah, the stress, and interesting comment about you guys, setting your limits. Like, we're not gonna work over the weekend on this. Otherwise, although I do think it may be contributing to your retirement, Andy. Yeah, you can go.
He's had enough.
All right.
Yeah, holding that line was, that was certainly my job. And I was, trying to do my best on that. And I think we did a reasonable job of not killing ourselves on this. There were a couple times when it was like, all right, let's go ahead and stay and fix it. It's nighttime, but it'd be better to fix it, but not too often.
All right, I see Chris McLean has his hand up too. Chris, you want to unmute?
Yeah, I was wondering, out of this, dealing with the different systems across the state, generally health, if there was any push revelation to maybe try and make them more, I don't want to say standardized, but more open, so that the next time this happens, that it's something new, that you'll be able to work with data across programs and areas of interest a little easier.
Yes, that realization was actually there before the pandemic. There was starting to be a move to make some policy changes to sort of make things default to being more open. It's the kind of thing, it's when that sort of idea surfaces, people that have been around a while realize that it's going to take a while to accomplish it, even in normal times, because some of these systems are old and rigid, and so making them different is hard. But there was, even out of the governor's office and the Office of Innovation, there was a lot of discussion about that issue that is ongoing, but not during the emergency.
Yeah, I think another aspect of that, Andy, is the staff support for all these various systems. Like having some experienced GIS folks in health who understand those systems and kind of their quirks and intricacies and how they handle location and geography would have been great, right? Because they would know the quirks of these systems. They would know, and that's a good thing right up front, and could have conveyed that to us, for example. So that's been identified, and IT has made some recommendations to health management, and they're looking to bring in people, but they're still in crisis response mode over there. So it's a challenge for them just to take a breather and think about their staffing.
Right.
Yeah, there's another question here. Were there any problems with faulty data being provided? If so, how was that handled?
The one with the zip codes, in a sense, was faulty. And there were a couple of other little things where we noticed that something didn't look right. But for the most part, it was what it was. Although the process for creating the summary data was a lot more painful for them than it ideally would have been, the result was correct.
Okay. Yeah, so Brian put the link to the dashboard into the website, and I encourage folks to take a look. I actually had not looked at it. I was thinking about you guys and what was going on, but now I can see. Now I see what you guys were doing. So good stuff. Thank you for presenting. This does conclude the meeting, and we'll say goodbye to Eddie. We'll see him around, I'm sure. But the next meeting of the task of the forum will be March 3rd, and the executive committee will be meeting this afternoon to work together work on the schedule for our next for 2022. So that's it. Thank you everyone for listening in and participating, and have a nice holiday, and we'll see you next year. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
See you. So long, everyone.
See you, Embley.
Bye.